I stood in Principal Carter's office at 7:15 a.m., still wearing my white nursing uniform with a stethoscope around my neck. The same uniform I'd worn for 33 years in this school. The same stethoscope I'd used to check thousands of racing hearts before big tests, to calm anxious children, to catch pneumonia before it became serious. Carter didn't look at me as she slid the termination letter across her desk. "Margaret, your position is being eliminated effective immediately. We're outsourcing health services to a private medical company that can provide coverage at 40% lower cost. 33 years. 33 years of administering medications, treating injuries, comforting sick children, and calling parents when something wasn't right. 33 years of knowing which kids had asthma, which had diabetes, which had anxiety that manifested as stomach aches. 33 years of being the person children trusted when they were scared or hurt or didn't want to tell anyone else. What happened next changed everything. If you've ever been told your experience doesn't matter, if you've ever been replaced by someone cheaper who doesn't know what you know, this story is for you. I'm so glad you're here. Please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Because what I discovered about why they really fired me, what I did with that information, it saved children's lives and exposed a scandal that reached 43 schools across the state. My name is Margaret Chen. I'm 61 years old. And I was about to learn that being the nurse who refuses to look the other way is more powerful than any cost-cutting measure. It's about budget efficiency, Carter said when I asked why they were really letting me go. The district is facing a $2 million shortfall. We need to reduce overhead costs. A private medical company can provide the same services at a fraction of your salary and benefits, the same services. I'd been the school nurse at Riverside Elementary for 33 years. I knew 840 children by name. I knew that Tommy Rodriguez's inhaler needed to be administered 15 minutes before pay or he'd have an attack. I knew that Sarah Mitchell's epilepsy medication had to be given at exactly 11 a.m. with food or she'd get nauseous. I knew that David Park's diabetes required constant monitoring because his blood sugar swung wildly during growth spurts. I knew that Maya Johnson's peanut allergy was so severe that I kept 3 EpiPens in different locations and had trained for teachers on how to use them. But none of that mattered. I was overhead being reduced. That afternoon, I cleaned out my office. 33 years of medical supplies, emergency protocols, and health records. 33 years of Band-Aids with cartoon characters, ice packs shaped like animals, and stickers that said "Brave Patient." 33 years of thank you cards from parents whose children I'd helped. As I packed, children kept appearing at my door. "Miss Margaret, are you leaving? Why are you taking everything? Who's going to help us when we're sick?" I told them a new nurse would be coming, someone who would take good care of them. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. Because I'd seen the contract on Carter's desk. The private medical company was sending 1 nurse to cover for schools. Each school would have nursing coverage for 2 hours per day. 2 hours for 840 children. What happened during the other 6 hours when school was in session? What happened when Tommy had an asthma attack at 1 p.m.? When Sarah needed her medication at 11? When David's blood sugar crashed during afternoon recess? When Maya accidentally ate something with peanuts? That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and told my husband, James, what had happened. He'd been expecting it. "The district has been cutting experienced staff for months," he said. Teachers with decades of experience replaced by new graduates. Counselors eliminated. Librarians reduced to part-time. All to save money. "But this is different," I said. "This isn't just about experience. This is about safety. You can't cover 840 children for 2 hours a day. What happens the rest of the time?" James looked at me seriously. "What do you think happens?" "They hope nothing goes wrong." And when something does go wrong, they blame the parents for not managing their child's medical needs better. I thought about Tommy's asthma. His mother worked 2 jobs. She couldn't leave work to come give him his inhaler. That was my job. I thought about Sarah's epilepsy. Her medication schedule was complicated. Her parents depended on me to make sure she got it right. I thought about David's diabetes. His parents had taught him to manage it, but he was 10 years old. He needed an adult checking on him. I thought about Maya's allergy. Her parents had been terrified sending her to school. I'd promised them I would keep her safe. What happened to those promises now? The next morning, I didn't have to wake up at 6 a.m. for the first time in 33 years. I could sleep in, but I couldn't. My body was programmed. So I got up, made coffee, and found myself driving to the school. Not to work, just to see. I parked across the street and watched. At 7:30 a.m., the new nurse arrived. Young woman, maybe 28, carrying a laptop bag instead of a medical kit. She went inside. At 9:30 a.m., she came out, got in her car, and drove away. 2 hours, 8:30 to 9:30. That was it. I waited. At 10:15 a.m., I saw a teacher rush outside with a child. Little boy, maybe 7, gasping for breath. Asthma attack. The teacher looked around frantically, then pulled out her phone. Called 911. I recognized the boy, Marcus Williams. I knew his medication. I knew his triggers. I knew that if you got him calm and gave him his inhaler properly, the attack would pass in minutes without needing an ambulance. But the teacher didn't know that. She wasn't trained. And the nurse was already gone to the next school. I got out of my car and ran across the street. I'm a nurse, I told the teacher. Let me help. The teacher recognized me. Miss Margaret, thank God. Marcus can't breathe. I knelt beside Marcus. He was panicking, which made the attack worse. I took his hands. Marcus, look at me. Remember how we breathe together? Slow breath in, hold, slow breath out. He focused on my face. We breathed together. His panic started to ease. Where's his inhaler? I asked the teacher. I don't know, she said. The office. I should have it. I don't know how this works now. I sent her to get the inhaler from the office. While we waited, I kept Marcus calm, breathing slowly, talking in a soothing voice, checking his pulse, watching his color. The teacher returned with the inhaler. I administered it properly. To puffs, wait, to more puffs. Within 5 minutes, Marcus was breathing normally. The teacher canceled the ambulance. Miss Margaret, she said, shaking, what would have happened if you hadn't been here? I didn't answer, but we both knew. An unnecessary ambulance ride. A terrified child. Parents called away from work. Hundreds of dollars in emergency medical bills. All because the school didn't have a nurse. I helped Marcus back inside and left before anyone from administration saw me. But I was furious. This was day 1. Day 1 without a full-time nurse. And already a child had nearly gone to the hospital unnecessarily. What would happen tomorrow, next week, next month? That afternoon, I called 5 parents of children with serious medical conditions. I told them what had happened. I explained the new nursing coverage schedule. I warned them that their children would only have access to a nurse for 2 hours a day. The parents were shocked. 2 hours. One mother said, "But my daughter needs her medication at 11. What happens if the nurse is gone? You'll have to come to school to give it to her yourself," I said. "Or the school will send her to class without it." "But that's illegal," another parent said. "Schools are required to have medical staff to administer medications." Are they? I asked because I think you should check the fine print. That night, those 5 parents called 20 more parents, who called 50 more. Within 2 days, over 200 parents knew about the nursing coverage reduction, and they were furious. On day 3, I received a call from Lisa Rodriguez, Tommy's mother. "Miss Margaret," she said, crying. "Tommy had an asthma attack yesterday during pay. The teacher didn't know what to do. They called me at work, but I couldn't leave." By the time I convinced my boss to let me go, Tommy had been sitting in the office struggling to breathe for 45 minutes. A child with asthma, unable to breathe properly, waiting for help that should have been immediately available. I was shaking with rage. "Is he okay?" I asked. "He's okay," Lisa said, "but he's scared to go back to school. He thinks if he gets sick again, no one will help him." That night, I made a decision. I would document everything, every incident, every missed medication, every emergency that wasn't handled properly, every child who suffered because the school didn't have adequate nursing coverage. If this district thought they could eliminate school nurses and nothing bad would happen, I would prove them wrong. For the next 2 weeks, I became a detective. I contacted parents. I monitored emergency calls from the school. I documented incidents. Week 1, 15 children missed scheduled medications. 8 children had medical emergencies during non-nursing hours. 3 children were sent to the hospital unnecessarily because staff didn't know how to handle routine issues. 4 children with chronic conditions had their parents called to school multiple times. Week 2, the new nurse quit. The company sent a replacement who lasted 3 days. They sent a 3rd nurse. She covered 2 hours, but at different times each day because she was trying to manage for schools on an impossible schedule. Parents started pulling children out of school. Lisa Rodriguez kept Tommy home 3 days. Sarah Mitchell's parents hired a private nurse to sit with her during school hours at their own expense. David Park's parents considered homeschooling. Maya Johnson's parents were terrified every single day. By the end of the 2nd week, I had a notebook full of incidents, but I needed more. I needed to prove that this wasn't just bad luck or an adjustment period. I needed to prove that the district knew this would happen and did it anyway. I called my friend Rachel, who still worked in the district's administrative office. "Rachel," I said, "I need to know about the contract with the medical company. Who approved it? What did they know about coverage limitations?" Rachel hesitated. "Margaret, that's confidential, I know," I said. "But children are being hurt. Parents are being forced to choose between their jobs and their children's safety. And I think the district knew this would happen." After a long pause, Rachel said, "Meet me tomorrow." "Not at the office. There's a coffee shop on Miller Street. Come alone." The next morning, I met Rachel at the coffee shop. She handed me a folder. "This is everything," she said. "The proposal from the medical company, the district's analysis, the budget projections, and the emails." "What emails?" I asked. "Emails from the superintendent's office discussing the risks of reduced nursing coverage," Rachel said. They knew children with chronic conditions might not receive proper care. They knew emergencies might not be handled appropriately. They knew parents would have to leave work to provide medical care, and they approved it anyway, because the cost savings were worth the risk. I spent the next 2 hours reading through the documents. They were damning. The medical company's proposal clearly stated that nursing coverage would be limited to 2 hours per school per day. The district's risk assessment acknowledged that this could result in delayed medical treatment and increased emergency responses. The budget analysis showed that even accounting for potential lawsuits from medical incidents, the cost savings made the contract financially advantageous. They had done a cost-benefit analysis on children's health and decided that saving money was more important than ensuring kids got their medications on time. More important than having a nurse available when a child had an asthma attack. More important than parents being able to work without worrying their diabetic child might go into shock. There was more. Emails from Principal Carter to the superintendent expressing concern about the nursing coverage reduction. Emails from teachers asking for additional medical training because they were scared they wouldn't know what to do in an emergency. And emails from the district's legal team advising that the contract should include liability waivers to protect the district from lawsuits if something went wrong. They knew children would be at risk, and they did it anyway. I made copies of everything. Then I called Lisa Rodriguez. "Lisa," I said, "I need you to gather every parent who has a child with a medical condition. I need them to document every problem they've had since the nursing change. Every missed medication, every emergency. Every time they had to leave work, everything." "Why?" Lisa asked. "Because the district made a choice," I said. They knew reducing nursing coverage would hurt children. They did a cost-benefit analysis and decided it was worth the risk, and I'm going to prove it. 2 days later, I met with 4 to 7 parents in a community center. I showed them the documents, the contract, the risk assessment, the emails. The room erupted. They knew, one father shouted. They knew our kids wouldn't get proper medical care, and they did it anyway. "Yes," I said. They calculated that even if there were lawsuits, it would be cheaper than paying for full-time school nurses. "What can we do?" a mother asked. "We organize," I said. "We document every incident. We file formal complaints with the school board, the state education department, and the health department. We contact the media. We make so much noise they can't ignore us, and we demand that full-time school nurses be reinstated. I can't do this alone. I need your help. We're with you, Margaret," Lisa said. "Every single one of us." Over the next 3 weeks, parents mobilized. They documented incidents with timestamps and medical records. They filed complaints through official channels. They wrote letters to local news stations. They created a Facebook group called Restore School Nurses that grew to 1,200 members in 1 week. They organized a protest at the next school board meeting, and they reached out to parents at other schools. Because Riverside Elementary wasn't the only school affected. The district had implemented the same contract at 43 schools. 43 schools with inadequate nursing coverage. Thousands of children at risk. Hundreds of parents forced to choose between their jobs and their children's safety. Meanwhile, I kept documenting. I tracked every emergency call from schools in the district. I interviewed teachers who were scared they weren't qualified to handle medical situations. I collected medical records from parents whose children had been harmed, and I built a case that was undeniable. 3 weeks after my termination, a local news reporter contacted me, Margaret Chen. "I'm David Park from News Channel 7. I've been hearing from parents about problems with school nursing coverage. Do you know anything about this?" "I know everything about it," I said. "And I have documents to prove the district knew children would be harmed." We met the next day. I showed him everything: the contract, the risk assessments, the emails proving the district knew coverage would be inadequate, the documented incidents of children missing medications and having improperly handled emergencies, the parent stories. "This is bigger than I thought," David said. "This could be a major investigation. How many schools are affected?" 43 in this district, I said. "But if this district is doing it, others probably are too. This could be statewide." David spent 2 weeks investigating. He interviewed parents, teachers, and medical experts. He obtained additional documents through public records requests. He found that 6 other school districts in the state had implemented similar contracts with medical companies. He discovered that the medical company providing services had been cited in 3 other states for inadequate coverage and had been involved in 2 lawsuits where children had been harmed. The story aired on a Tuesday evening. Cost-cutting catastrophe. How school districts are putting children at risk to save money. The segment showed my documentation. Interviewed affected parents and presented the emails proving the district knew children would be endangered. It featured a particularly heartbreaking interview with Lisa Rodriguez and her son Tommy. "My son is afraid to go to school," Lisa said, crying on camera. "He's afraid that if he gets sick, no one will help him." And the district knew this would happen. They chose money over my child's safety. The story went viral immediately. Within 24 hours, it had been shared across social media platforms. Parents from other districts started coming forward with identical problems. The state education department announced an investigation. The state health department launched a review of school nursing requirements. The governor called 4 emergency hearings, and my phone started ringing. News outlets from across the state wanted interviews. Parents wanted help organizing. Teachers wanted to share their concerns. And lawyers wanted to discuss potential lawsuits. Principal Carter called me. "Margaret," she said, her voice tight, "you've created significant problems for this district. We're facing multiple investigations because of your actions." "Good," I said. "You eliminated school nurses knowing children would be harmed. You did cost-benefit analyses on children's health. You prioritized saving money over keeping kids safe. You deserve every investigation you're facing." The district tried to do damage control. They issued a statement saying they were reviewing nursing coverage and were committed to student safety. But parents weren't buying it. The school board meeting 3 days after the story aired was packed. Over 400 parents attended. They had to move the meeting to the high school auditorium to accommodate everyone. I sat in the front row with Lisa Rodriguez, Sarah Mitchell's parents, David Park's parents, and Maya Johnson's parents. We were surrounded by parents holding signs that said "Children over costs and restore. Our nurses and safety first." The superintendent tried to defend the decision. "We made a difficult choice based on budget constraints," he said. "We believed the medical company could provide adequate coverage." "You didn't believe that," I said, standing up. "You knew it was inadequate. You assessed the risks and decided they were acceptable. I have the emails to prove it." The room erupted in applause. Parent after parent stood to speak. Lisa Rodriguez described Tommy's 45-minute asthma attack with no nurse available. Sarah Mitchell's mother explained how they'd hired a private nurse because they couldn't trust the school to give their daughter life-saving medication. David Park's father detailed 3 incidents where his son's blood sugar had crashed and teachers hadn't known what to do. Maya Johnson's mother, voice shaking with rage, described the terror of sending her daughter with a severe peanut allergy to a school with no full-time nurse. "What happens when she eats something with peanuts by accident?" she demanded. "What happens when she needs an EpiPen and the nurse is at a different school?" Do we just hope a teacher remembers the training from 5 years ago? Do we hope someone calls 911 in time? The school board looked uncomfortable. One board member tried to argue that the contract could be modified. "That's not good enough," I said. "You need to terminate the contract. You need to rehire full-time school nurses. You need to admit you made a mistake that endangered children. And you need to ensure this never happens again." The meeting lasted 4 hours. By the end, the school board had voted unanimously to suspend the contract with the medical company pending a full review. They didn't reinstate nurses immediately, but they committed to an emergency hiring process. It wasn't enough. I wanted accountability. 2 days after the school board meeting, I filed a lawsuit, not for myself, for the children. I filed on behalf of 12 families whose children had been harmed by inadequate nursing coverage. The lawsuit named the school district, the medical company, and the superintendent personally for knowingly creating unsafe conditions. Our attorney was a woman named Sharon Martinez who specialized in education law. "Margaret," she said, "I've been practicing for 20 years and I've never seen documentation this clear. They knew children would be harmed. They calculated the financial risk, and they did it anyway. That's not just negligence. That's reckless endangerment. The lawsuit detailed every incident: Tommy Rodriguez's asthma attacks, Sarah Mitchell's missed seizure medications, David Park's dangerously low blood sugar episodes, Maya Johnson's daily terror of accidental peanut exposure, and dozens more. Children who'd been sent to the hospital unnecessarily, children who'd missed critical medications, children who'd suffered because there was no nurse available to help them. The lawsuit also included the documents Rachel had given me: the contract showing inadequate coverage, the risk assessment acknowledging potential harm, the budget analysis treating potential lawsuits as acceptable costs, the emails proving district administrators knew and approved anyway. The media coverage intensified. National news picked up the story. It became a symbol of broader debates about education funding, privatization, and whether schools prioritize budgets over children. I appeared on morning shows. I testified at state legislative hearings. I spoke at rallies organized by parent groups and teacher unions. And everywhere I went, I said the same thing. This isn't just about one school or one district. This is about a fundamental question. Do children's health and safety matter more than cost savings? Because if districts can eliminate school nurses to save money, what else can they eliminate? Teachers, counselors, safety measures? At what point do we say that some things are too important to cut? The lawsuit moved forward. The district tried to settle quietly, but I refused. This needed to be public. This needed to be a message that you can't endanger children to save money without consequences. The state investigation concluded first. The report was scathing. It found that the district had knowingly implemented nursing coverage that was inadequate to meet student medical needs. It documented 4 to 7 incidents where children had been harmed or endangered. It revealed that the medical company had been providing even less coverage than contracted, sometimes only 90 minutes per school instead of 2 hours. The state education department issued sanctions. The district was placed on probation. The superintendent was suspended pending further investigation. And new regulations were implemented requiring minimum nursing coverage ratios based on student enrollment and medical needs. But the state report also revealed something worse. The medical company had contracts with 18 school districts across the state. The problem was far bigger than just our district. Hundreds of schools, thousands of children, all receiving inadequate medical coverage. Parent groups formed across the state. The Restore School Nurses movement grew from 1,200 members to over 15,000. They organized, they protested, they lobbied state legislators, and they demanded change. Meanwhile, our lawsuit progressed to trial. The courtroom was packed. Parents filled every seat. Local news covered it live. The district's attorneys tried to argue that they'd made a reasonable business decision based on budget constraints. Our attorney countered with the emails. She projected them on screens for the jury to read. "Here's the district's risk assessment," Sharon said, acknowledging that reduced nursing coverage could result in delayed medical treatment. "Here's the budget analysis showing they knew there might be lawsuits but calculated those would be cheaper than full-time nurses. Here's the superintendent's email approving the contract despite these known risks." She called expert witnesses, pediatricians who testified about the importance of school nurses, medical professionals who explained what could happen when children with chronic conditions don't receive proper care, education experts who testified that school nurses are essential for student safety. She called parents. Lisa Rodriguez described finding her son Tommy sitting in the school office, struggling to breathe, for 45 minutes because no one knew what to do. Sarah Mitchell's mother explained the terror of knowing her daughter might have a seizure at school with no medical professional to help her. David Park's father detailed the 3 times his son's blood sugar had dropped dangerously low and teachers had panicked instead of following the simple protocol I had established. and Sharon called me. I walked the jury through my 33 years as a school nurse. I explained how I knew every child with a medical condition, how I knew their medications, their triggers, their parents' phone numbers, their fears, how I had protocols in place for every possible emergency, how I had trained teachers and staff, how I had kept children safe. Then Sharon asked me about the day I was fired. They told me a medical company could provide the same services for 40% less cost. I said, but I knew that wasn't true. You can't provide the same service in 2 hours a day that I provided in 8 hours. You can't know children's individual needs in 2-hour increments across for schools. You can't build the trust and relationships that make children feel safe telling you when something's wrong. And you can't respond to emergencies when you're not there. Sharon showed me the documents, the contract, the risk assessment, the emails. Did you know the district was aware that reducing nursing coverage could harm children? She asked. No, I said. If I had known that they knew and approved it anyway, I would have fought this before they fired me. But I believed they were making an uninformed mistake. I didn't realize they had done the analysis and decided children's health was an acceptable sacrifice for budget savings. The jury was riveted. Several were visibly angry. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 8 hours. They found in our favor on all counts. The district was found liable for knowingly creating unsafe conditions for students. The medical company was found liable for misrepresenting their capacity to provide adequate coverage. The superintendent was found personally liable for approving a contract he knew would endanger children. The jury awarded $4.2 million in damages. But more than the money, they sent a message that schools cannot sacrifice children's health and safety for cost savings, that administrators who knowingly endanger students will be held accountable, that parents and communities have the power to fight back. On the courthouse steps, surrounded by parents and reporters, I gave a statement. This verdict isn't just about nursing coverage, I said. It's about priorities. It's about what we value as a society. Do we value children's health and safety? Or do we value cost savings? Because we can't have both when districts make decisions like this one. The verdict made national news. School districts across the country started reviewing their nursing coverage. Several terminated contracts with private medical companies. State legislatures began introducing bills to mandate minimum school nurse ratios. The movement we'd started in one elementary school had become a national conversation. I was 61 years old when I was fired. 61 and told I was too expensive. That my 33 years of experience could be replaced by a part-time contractor for 40% less. But I'd proven something important. That knowing Tommy Rodriguez's asthma triggers wasn't wasteful spending. It was essential care. That understanding Sarah Mitchell's seizure medication schedule wasn't unnecessary overhead. It was life-saving knowledge. That monitoring David Park's blood sugar wasn't inefficient. It was keeping a child safe. That being available when Maya Johnson needed someone wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity. 3 months after the verdict, the district offered to reinstate me with back pay, with a formal apology, with a promise that nursing coverage would never be reduced again. I accepted not because I needed the job, but because the children needed me. On my first day back, the school held an assembly. 840 children packed into the gymnasium. Parents lined the walls. Teachers stood in the back. Principal Carter, who had somehow kept her job, introduced me. Miss Margaret is returning as our school nurse, she said. We are grateful for her dedication to student safety. The children erupted in applause. Many were crying. Tommy Rodriguez ran up and hugged me. Miss Margaret, he said, I'm not scared anymore. Now that you're back, I know someone will help me if I can't breathe. That moment, that hug from a child who felt safe again, was worth everything. But my work wasn't finished. The verdict had created momentum. Parent groups across the state were demanding change. Legislators were drafting bills. And I was invited to help shape policy. At 61, I became an advocate. I testified before state legislatures on school nursing requirements. I helped draft legislation mandating minimum nurse-to-student ratios. I consulted with districts on proper medical coverage. I trained parent groups on how to organize and fight for adequate school nursing. The bill we championed passed 8 months after the verdict. The School Nurse Protection Act required 1 full-time nurse for every 750 students. It prohibited districts from outsourcing nursing to companies that couldn't meet coverage requirements. It mandated that nurses be available during all school hours. It created penalties for districts that endangered students by reducing medical coverage. And it established a state fund to help districts afford adequate nursing staff. The bill was named the Margaret Chen School Safety Act. When the governor signed it, I stood beside him. With Lisa Rodriguez and Tommy, with Sarah Mitchell's parents, with David Park's family, with Maya Johnson's mother, with the 1,200 parents who'd organized and fought. This law will protect children across the state, the governor said. It ensures that no child will be denied medical care because their school prioritized cost savings over safety. It honors Margaret Chen's courage in exposing this problem and fighting to fix it. After the signing ceremony, reporters asked me what I wanted people to learn from this story. I want people to learn that you don't have to accept policies that hurt children, I said. When someone tells you that budget cuts are necessary, that there's no other choice, that costs must be reduced even if it means less safety or care, you can fight back. You can document the harm. You can organize your community. You can demand better. And you can win. But I also want administrators to learn something. That experienced professionals aren't just line items in a budget. We're people with knowledge that took decades to build. You can't replace a school nurse who knows every child's medical history with a contractor who visits for 2 hours. You can't replace relationships and trust with cost-saving measures. Some things are too important to cut. At 62, I was still working as the school nurse at Riverside Elementary, still administering medications, still treating injuries, still being the person children trusted when they were scared or hurt. But I was also training the next generation of school nurses, teaching them not just medical skills, but advocacy skills, how to document problems, how to speak up when policies endanger children, how to organize parents and communities, how to fight back when administrators prioritize budgets over safety. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to ask you something. Are you still with me? Are you invested in this story? If you are, please take a second right now to hit that like button. It helps more people find this story. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had to fight an organization that prioritized money over people? Have you ever exposed something wrong and fought to fix it? I want to hear your stories. The Margaret Chen School Safety Act became a model. 7 other states passed similar legislation within 2 years. School nursing became a priority issue in education policy debates. And districts that had been considering reducing nursing coverage reversed course. But the impact went beyond legislation. The case changed how people thought about school nurses. Before, many viewed us as expensive luxuries, nice to have, but not essential. After, people understood that school nurses are safety professionals, that we save lives, that we catch problems early, that we keep children healthy so they can learn. Medical organizations started using our case in training. They taught nursing students about advocacy, about speaking up when policies endanger patients, about documenting problems and fighting for change. Parent organizations cited our organizing as a model for grassroots advocacy. How to document harms, how to build coalitions, how to pressure institutions, how to use media effectively, how to translate outrage into policy change. At 63, I was invited to speak at the National School Nurses Association Conference. 2,000 school nurses from across the country attended my keynote. I told them my story. I showed them how documentation, community organizing, and unwillingness to stay silent had changed policy. And I challenged them to be advocates, not just care providers. We are the people who see when policies hurt children, I said. We're the ones who know when budget cuts cross the line from difficult to dangerous. We have a responsibility to speak up, to document, to fight. Because if we don't, who will? The nurses gave me a standing ovation. Afterward, dozens approached me with their own stories. My district is trying to reduce nursing to part-time. My school wants me to cover 3 buildings. My administrator told me to stop sending so many kids home sick because it looks bad for attendance numbers. I listened to each story. I took contact information. And I connected nurses with resources attorneys, parent advocacy groups, media contacts, documentation templates. I helped them fight. At 64, I received an award from the American Academy of Pediatrics for Advocacy in Child Health. The ceremony was held in a grand hotel ballroom with hundreds of pediatricians attending. When they called my name, I walked to the stage thinking about how far we'd come. From one fired school nurse to national legislation. From 12 families to a movement of 15,000 parents. From one district's cost-cutting disaster to a nationwide conversation about priorities. The president of the Academy spoke. Margaret Chen did what every healthcare professional should do when they see patients being harmed by policy, she said. She documented it, she spoke up, she organized, she fought. And she changed the system. She proved that one person with courage and evidence can create transformations that protect thousands. Today, we honor her not just for her 33 years of caring for children, but for her unwillingness to stay silent when those children were endangered. After the ceremony, pediatricians approached me with questions. How do we fight insurance companies that deny necessary care? How do we challenge hospital policies that prioritize profit over patients? How do we organize when we're exhausted and overworked? I gave them the same answer I'd given school nurses. Document everything, build coalitions, use media strategically. Don't accept being told that harmful policies are inevitable, fight. At 65, I started thinking about retirement. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to spend more time with my husband, James, with our grandchildren, with the life I'd built outside of work. But I wanted to leave a legacy. I wanted to ensure that what we'd accomplished would continue. I worked with the State Nurses Association to create a training program. The School Nurse Advocacy Institute would train nurses in documentation, community organizing, policy advocacy, and media relations. It would teach them how to fight back when their schools tried to reduce coverage or ignore medical needs. The program launched with 30 nurses in its first cohort. By the 3rd year, it had trained over 500. Those nurses went on to stop coverage reductions in dozens of districts. They organized parents. They changed policies. They protected children. One nurse, Maria Santos, used what she learned to stop her district from eliminating nursing at 3 schools. Another, James Wilson, organized a coalition that passed a city ordinance mandating school nurse coverage. A third, Sarah Kim, testified before Congress on school health funding. The movement multiplied. At 66, on my last day of work before retirement, the school held a celebration. 840 children, 100 teachers and staff, 200 parents, all gathered in the gymnasium where I'd returned 5 years earlier. Tommy Rodriguez, now 13, spoke. Miss Margaret saved my life," he said. Not just that day when I couldn't breathe and she helped me, but every day for 8 years when I knew that if something went wrong, she would be there. She made me feel safe. She made all of us feel safe. Sarah Mitchell, now 12, spoke next. "I have epilepsy," she said. "Most people are scared of it, but Miss Margaret never was. She knew exactly what to do. She taught my teachers what to do, and she fought to make sure I'd always have someone to help me. Because of her, I'm not afraid of school." David Park, now 11, spoke. "When I was little, my diabetes was scary," he said. "I didn't always understand my blood sugar or what it meant, but Miss Margaret checked on me every day. She taught me how to take care of myself. And when the school tried to get rid of her, my parents fought to bring her back. Now I know that adults can make mistakes, but they can also fix them if people fight back." Parents spoke, teachers spoke. Even Principal Carter spoke, acknowledging that the decision to eliminate nursing had been a mistake and praising my courage in fighting to fix it. I stood to give my farewell speech. 38 years ago, I became a school nurse, I said. I thought my job would be giving Band-Aids and checking temperatures, but it became so much more. It became knowing children's fears and helping them feel brave, knowing their medical needs and keeping them safe, knowing their families and supporting them. 5 years ago, I was fired, told I was too expensive, that my experience could be replaced, that budget savings mattered more than the relationships and knowledge I'd built over 33 years. I could have accepted it, could have walked away bitter and defeated. Instead, I documented what happened when schools don't have adequate nursing. I organized parents who were terrified for their children's safety. I exposed administrators who had calculated that lawsuits were cheaper than keeping kids safe. I fought, and we won. We won the lawsuit. We won legislation. We won a national conversation about priorities. But most importantly, we won something else. We proved that communities have power, that parents who organize can defeat budget cuts that harm their children, that one person refusing to stay silent can spark a movement, that experience and expertise matter and can't be replaced by cost-cutting measures. Thank you for letting me serve your children. Thank you for fighting alongside me. Thank you for proving that when we work together, we can protect what matters most. The gymnasium erupted in applause. Children were crying. Parents were crying. I was crying. After the ceremony, I walked through the school one last time, past the nurse's office where I'd treated thousands of children, past the classrooms where I'd taught health lessons, past the playground where I'd monitored children with asthma and allergies. At the front entrance, there was a new plaque. The Margaret Chen Health Center, dedicated to the nurse who proved that caring for children can never be outsourced. That evening, James and I sat on our back porch watching the sunset. "You changed things," he said. "For this school, for this state, for the country." I changed things because parents were willing to fight. I said, because 1,200 people refused to accept that their children's safety was negotiable. Because communities have power when they organize. At 6 to 7, I spent my first full year of retirement. I traveled with James. I spent time with grandchildren. I gardened, I read books, I rested. But I stayed connected to the work. The School Nurse Advocacy Institute continued. Parent organizations still called for advice. Nurses facing similar battles reached out for guidance, and I helped however I could. One afternoon, I received a call from a school nurse in another state. "Margaret," she said, "my district is trying to cut nursing coverage. They're using the same medical company yours did. I have your case files. Can you help me organize parents?" "Yes," I said, "send me the details. I'll connect you with attorneys, parent organizers, and media contacts, and I'll walk you through exactly how we documented, organized, and fought. Over the next 6 months, I helped that nurse organize parents, document incidents, and build a case. They won. The district reversed the decision, another battle, another victory, another group of children kept safe. At 68, I wrote a book, The School Nurse Who Fought Back: How One Woman's Courage Protected Thousands of Children and Changed National Policy. It detailed everything. My 33 years as a school nurse, the decision to eliminate nursing coverage, the discovery that the district had known children would be harmed, the organizing of parents, the lawsuit, the legislation, the movement. The book became required reading in nursing schools. It was cited in policy debates. It inspired other healthcare professionals facing similar battles. And it reached people who'd never thought about school nurses before. At 69, I did a book tour, 20 cities, speaking at bookstores, schools, and community centers. At every event, people shared stories. My child's school nurse saved his life. My daughter's school eliminated nursing, and now I'm terrified. My district is trying to cut coverage, and I don't know how to fight. And at every event, I gave them tools, documentation templates, organizing guides, contact information for advocacy groups and attorneys, because the fight wasn't over. School nursing was still under threat in districts facing budget pressures. Healthcare in general was still being treated as a cost to be minimized rather than an essential service. At 70, I received a letter from the White House. The president wanted to honor me at a ceremony recognizing Americans who'd made significant contributions to child health and safety. The ceremony was held in the East Room. I stood with 9 other honorees doctors who developed life-saving treatments, researchers who discovered cures, advocates who'd changed policy. The president spoke about each honoree. When he came to me, he said, Margaret Chen was a school nurse for 33 years. She knew every child in her care by name. She kept them safe. She cared for them. When she was fired to save money, she could have walked away. Instead, she documented that children were being harmed. She organized 1,200 parents. She exposed that administrators had knowingly endangered students. She won a $4.2 million lawsuit. She changed state law. She inspired federal legislation. She proved that experienced healthcare professionals are essential and cannot be replaced by cost-cutting measures. Today, we honor her for showing us what courage looks like, for proving that one person can fight a system and win, for protecting thousands of children, for changing how America thinks about school health. After the ceremony, reporters asked what I wanted my legacy to be. I want my legacy to be that healthcare professionals learn to fight. I said, not just provide care, but fight for the systems that allow them to provide care properly, to document when policies harm patients, to organize communities, to speak up even when it's uncomfortable or risky. Because if we don't fight for our patients, who will? At 71, my health started to decline, nothing serious. Just the accumulated effects of decades of work. My knees hurt from years of kneeling beside children. My back ached from carrying medical supplies. My hands were arthritic from decades of administering medications. But my mind was sharp, and I still had work to do. I focused on mentoring young nurses, teaching them not just medical skills, but advocacy skills. How to recognize when policies cross from difficult to dangerous. How to document harms without violating privacy. How to organize parents effectively. How to work with media. How to build coalitions. How to translate outrage into political pressure. One young nurse, Amanda Rodriguez-Lisa's daughter, now 24, became particularly passionate about advocacy. Miss Margaret, she said, I became a nurse because of you. Because I saw what you did for my brother and for all of us. I want to do the same thing. You will, I told her. Because you understand something that takes most people years to learn. that caring for patients includes fighting for systems that allow proper care, you're going to be a great nurse and a great advocate. At 72, I was diagnosed with heart disease. Not immediately life-threatening, but a reminder that time was finite. I thought about what I'd accomplished. 33 years as a school nurse, 5 years fighting for children's safety, 12 years as an advocate and mentor, legislation that protected students across multiple states, a movement that changed how America thought about school health, training programs that taught hundreds of nurses to fight, a book that inspired thousands. But more than any of that, I thought about Tommy Rodriguez's hug, about Sarah Mitchell telling me she wasn't afraid, about David Park learning to advocate for himself, about Maya Johnson feeling safe at school. Those moments, those children were what mattered. At 73, I received news that the Margaret Chen School Safety Act was being used as a model for federal legislation. Congress was considering a bill that would mandate minimum school nurse ratios nationwide and provide federal funding to help districts meet those requirements. They invited me to testify. I flew to Washington, D.C., sat before the House Committee on Education and Labor, and told my story one more time. I was a school nurse for 33 years. I said, I was fired to save money. Children were harmed because of that decision. I fought back, and we changed state law. Now you have the opportunity to change national law to ensure that every child in America has access to a school nurse, to guarantee that no district can sacrifice children's health for budget savings. The committee members asked questions. How do we fund this? Do we mandate specific ratios? How do we enforce requirements? I answered each question with specific recommendations based on what had worked in our state. Federal funding matched by state contributions. Ratios based on enrollment and medical needs. Enforcement through Education Department oversight and penalties for non-compliance. One congressman asked the question that mattered most. Why does this need to be federal? Why can't states decide this themselves? Because children's health shouldn't depend on which state they live in, I said. A child with asthma in California needs the same protection as a child with asthma in Maine, a diabetic. Child in Texas deserves the same care as a diabetic child in New York. This isn't a state issue. It's a human issue. Healthcare is a right, not a luxury determined by zip code. The bill passed committee. It went to the full House. It passed with bipartisan support. It went to the Senate. It passed. 6 months after my testimony, the president signed the National School Health Protection Act. I stood beside him again, with Tommy Rodriguez, now 18 and studying to become a respiratory therapist, with Sarah Mitchell, now 17 and advocating for epilepsy awareness, with David Park, now 16 and running a diabetes education nonprofit, with Maya Johnson, now 15 and training to become an EMT. The children whose safety I'd fought for were now young adults fighting for others. This law ensures that every child in America will have access to a school nurse, the president said. It honors the courage of Margaret Chen, who refused to accept that children's health was negotiable. It proves that one person's fight can change a nation. At 74, I watched as the law was implemented. Federal funding flowed to districts. Schools hired nurses. Children who'd never had access to school nursing before were getting medications, emergency care, and health education. The impact was measurable. Emergency room visits from schools decreased. Chronic disease management improved. Parents no longer had to leave work to provide medical care at schools. Children with medical conditions felt safer, and schools were healthier overall. At 75, I gave my final public speech. It was at Riverside Elementary, at a ceremony marking 10 years since the Margaret Chen Health Center had been established. The school now had 3 full-time nurses, a wellness center, mental health counselors, dental services, all funded through a combination of school budget, state support, and federal grants. I stood in front of the current students, 800 children who'd never known me as their nurse but knew my story. I told them about being fired, about discovering children were being harmed, about organizing parents, about fighting back. And I told them why it mattered. You're too young to fight these battles now, I said. But someday you'll be adults. You'll see policies that hurt people. You'll see systems that prioritize money over care. You'll see injustice, and you'll have a choice. You can accept it, or you can fight. I hope I've shown you that fighting is possible, that documenting problems, organizing communities, and refusing to stay silent can change things, that one person can make a difference. Remember that when you're older. Remember that you have power. At 76, my heart condition worsened. I spent more time at home, less traveling, less public speaking, but I stayed connected. The School Nurse Advocacy Institute had trained over 2,000 nurses. Parent organizations I'd helped establish were operating in 4 to 3 states. The legislation I'd fought for was protecting millions of children. And young advocates like Amanda Rodriguez were carrying the work forward. Amanda visited me regularly. She'd become a school nurse herself, and she'd already organized parents in her district to stop a proposed budget cut. "Miss Margaret," she said, "I did exactly what you taught me. I documented incidents. I connected with parents. I showed them the harm that would result, and we won." The district reversed the decision. That's the legacy. I told her not what I did, but what you're doing. What thousands of nurses are doing because they learned they have power. Keep fighting. Keep protecting children. Keep proving that healthcare is essential and can't be outsourced or eliminated to save money. At 77, I wrote my last letter, addressed to school nurses everywhere. "Dear colleague," I wrote, "if you're reading this, you're probably facing budget cuts, being told to do more with less, being pressured to accept policies that you know will harm children. I know how that feels. I was fired for being too expensive, but I didn't accept it. I documented the harm. I organized parents. I fought back. And we won legislation that now protects millions of children. You can do the same. You have power. You have knowledge. You have evidence. You have communities of parents who depend on you and will fight for you. Use those tools. Document everything. Connect with parents. Speak up. Don't accept being told that children's health is negotiable, because it's not. You became a nurse to care for people. But sometimes caring for people means fighting systems that prevent proper care. Be brave, be loud, be persistent. And know that you're part of a movement of thousands of nurses who refuse to stay silent. With respect and solidarity, Margaret Chen, I asked that the letter be posted on the School Nurse Advocacy Institute website, so nurses facing battles could read it and know they weren't alone. At 78, I was mostly bedridden. My heart was failing. I knew my time was limited, but I was at peace. I'd lived a meaningful life. A life that mattered, a life that changed things. Amanda Rodriguez visited one last time. She was 28 now, a confident advocate, a skilled nurse, a fierce protector of children. "Miss Margaret," she said, holding my hand, "I want you to know that your work continues." 200 nurses graduated from the Advocacy Institute this year. 15 districts reversed coverage cuts because nurses organized. 3 more states passed school nursing protection laws. And the federal law you fought for is protecting children in every state. Your legacy is alive. That's all I could ask for, I told her. The work continues. Children continue to be protected. That's what matters. I died at 78, surrounded by family, James beside me. Our children and grandchildren gathered. My life's work complete. My funeral was held at Riverside Elementary. The gymnasium where I'd worked, where I'd returned after being reinstated, where I'd said goodbye, hundreds attended. School nurses from across the country, parents I'd worked with, children I'd cared for, now adults, advocates and organizers I'd trained. Amanda Rodriguez spoke. Margaret Chen taught me that nursing isn't just about band-aids and medications, she said. It's about fighting for systems that allow proper care. She proved that one person refusing to stay silent can change laws, protect thousands, and inspire generations. I carry her stethoscope now. Not literally, though, I'd be honored to. But I carry her philosophy, her commitment to advocacy, her belief that healthcare is too important to sacrifice for budget savings. Tommy Rodriguez spoke. He was 25 now, a respiratory therapist working in a children's hospital. Margaret saved my life multiple times, he said. When I couldn't breathe, when the school tried to eliminate nursing, when I needed to know that adults could make mistakes but also fight to fix them. Because of her, I became a healthcare professional. Because I want to protect children the way she protected me. Sarah Mitchell spoke. She was 24, an epilepsy advocate who testified before state legislatures about healthcare access. I have epilepsy, she said. When I was young, that was scary. But Margaret made me feel safe. She knew what to do. She taught others what to do. And when the school tried to eliminate her position, she organized my parents and hundreds of others to fight back. She taught me that having a medical condition doesn't make you weak. Fighting for proper care makes you strong, David Park spoke. He was 23, running a diabetes education nonprofit. When I was young, I didn't understand why Margaret checked on me every day, he said. Why she monitored my blood sugar so carefully. Why she taught me to advocate for myself. Now I understand. She was keeping me safe. And she was teaching me to keep myself safe. And to fight for systems that keep all diabetic children safe. I run a nonprofit because of her. Because she showed me that one person organizing others can change policies that save lives. The superintendent spoke. The same one who'd been suspended after the lawsuit. Who'd ultimately been reinstated after implementing reforms. Margaret Chen changed this district, he said. She exposed failures we should have caught ourselves. She organized a community that held us accountable. She proved that cutting school nurses was dangerous and wrong. Because of her, we've rebuilt our school health system. We've prioritized student safety. We've learned that some things are too important to cut. After this service, they held a procession through the school, past the Margaret Chen Health Center, past the classrooms where children learned, past the playground where children played safely because nurses were watching. At every door, nurses in white uniforms stood at attention. Dozens of nurses. From schools across the district. From schools across the state. Honoring one of their own who'd fought and won. My ashes were scattered in the school garden. The garden where I taught children about health and nutrition for 33 years. I became part of the school. Literally and figuratively. Part of the earth, part of the memory. Part of the legacy. 5 years after I died, the School Nurse Advocacy Institute had grown into a national organization with chapters in all 50 states. They trained over 8,000 nurses, changed policies in hundreds of districts, protected millions of children. Amanda Rodriguez was now the director, leading trainings, supporting nurses facing battles, carrying forward what I'd started. 10 years after I died, Congress expanded the National School Health Protection Act. It now included mental health counselors, dental services, and vision screening. Comprehensive school health. All because one school nurse had proven that children's health mattered and that communities would fight for it. 15 years after I died, my book was still assigned in nursing schools across the country. Students learned about me in healthcare policy classes. Not as a famous person, but as an ordinary nurse who did something extraordinary, who refused to accept that children's health was negotiable, who documented harm, who organized parents who fought a system, and 20 years after I died, they made a documentary, The Nurse Who Wouldn't Stay Silent, the Margaret Chen story. It featured interviews with Tommy, Sarah, David, and Mayo, all now in their 40s, healthcare professionals who'd been inspired by what I'd done. It showed the organizing, the lawsuit, the legislation, the movement. The documentary won awards. It was shown in schools across America. Students learned that ordinary people can change systems, that documenting problems and organizing communities works, that healthcare is too important to sacrifice for cost savings. 25 years after I died, Riverside Elementary held a ceremony. The school was celebrating 100 years of existence. They unveiled a statue, bronze, life-sized, showing me kneeling beside a child, stethoscope around my neck, medical bag open beside me. The plaque read, 1961-2039 sheer years. She fought for children's safety for 17 years. She proved that healthcare professionals who document harm, organize communities, and refuse to stay silent can change laws and protect millions. Her legacy continues in every nurse who fights, every parent who organizes, every child who receives care. 30 years after I died, the neighborhood still remembered me, not everyone. Many of the children I'd cared for had moved away, started families, built careers. But the story persisted. New families heard about the school nurse who'd been fired and fought back, who'd changed state and federal law, who'd protected their children even before they were born. Every year on my birthday, the school held a health and wellness fair, free health screenings, nutrition education, mental health resources, celebrating comprehensive school health, honoring the principle that children's well-being matters. 50 years after I died, my great-granddaughter became a school nurse, Elena Chen Rodriguez's daughter. She'd heard stories about me her whole life, about the great-grandmother who'd fought to protect children, who'd changed laws, who'd inspired a movement. Elena got assigned to a school in a different state, different children, different challenges, but the same principles. She learned names, she monitored chronic conditions, she built relationships, she made children feel safe. And when her district tried to implement policies that would harm children, Elena organized. She documented problems. She connected with parents. She fought back. Just like her great-grandmother had taught. Just like I'd proven was possible. The work continued. The philosophy spread. The fight persisted. 75 years after I died, healthcare historians studied my impact. They documented how one fired school nurse had sparked a national reconsideration of healthcare in schools. They traced policy changes across decades. They showed how the Margaret Chen School Safety Act and the National School Health Protection Act had protected tens of millions of children. They demonstrated that my lawsuit had changed not just school nursing but healthcare advocacy broadly. And they concluded that I represented a turning point. A moment when healthcare professionals learned they could fight systems and win. That documentation, community organizing, and refusal to stay silent were powerful tools. 100 years after I died, the Margaret Chen Health Center held a centennial celebration. The building had been expanded. It now housed 6 nurses, 3 mental health counselors, 2 dental hygienists, and a health educator. The ceremony brought together school health professionals from across the country. They screened the documentary. They held panel discussions about advocacy and organizing. They recommitted to the principles I'd fought for. That children's health is essential and cannot be sacrificed for cost savings. That healthcare professionals have a responsibility to speak up when policies harm patients. That communities have power when they organize. That documentation and evidence can defeat even well-funded opposition. The keynote speaker was Elena Chen Rodriguez, my great-granddaughter, now 76 years old. A lifetime of school nursing behind her, decades of advocacy work. My great-grandmother was fired at 61, Elena said. She was told she was too expensive, that her 33 years of knowledge could be replaced by a part-time contractor. She proved them wrong. She documented that children were being harmed. She organized 1,200 parents. She exposed administrators who'd calculated that lawsuits were cheaper than proper care. She won. She changed state law. She inspired federal legislation. She trained thousands of nurses to fight. I spent my career trying to live up to her example, trying to care for children the way she did, trying to fight when policies threaten their safety, trying to organize communities, trying to prove that healthcare is essential. I wasn't as transformative as she was. I didn't change national policy or win historic lawsuits, but I protected children in my schools. I trained younger nurses. I organized parents when needed. And I carried forward her legacy. That's what she would have wanted. Not fame or statues or centennial celebrations, but for the work to continue, for nurses to keep fighting, for children to keep being protected, for the principle to endure that healthcare matters more than cost savings. The audience stood and applauded, not for Elena, but for the idea she represented. That one person's courage can echo across a century. That principles fought for by one nurse can shape how society values healthcare for generations. 125 years after I died, the specifics of my story had faded from public memory. Few people knew details about the lawsuit or the organizing, but the principle remained. The idea that I'd come to represent persisted. Healthcare professionals fight for their patients. Communities organize to protect children. Documentation and evidence defeat bad policy. These ideas, fought for and proven by a fired school nurse, had become embedded in culture. They shaped how society thought about healthcare, about schools, about children's safety, about advocacy, not perfectly, not universally, but meaningfully. 200 years after I died, my name appeared in medical history textbooks, brief mention, a footnote in the larger story of 21st century healthcare advocacy. Margaret Chen, school nurse who challenged cost-cutting policies that endangered children and sparked national movement for healthcare access. That's what I'd become. A footnote, a name in a textbook, a statue in front of an old school building. A principle people followed without remembering where it came from. And that was perfect, because the work had never been about me. It had been about proving something important, that children's health matters more than budget savings, that healthcare professionals can fight systems and win, that communities have power when they organize, that you're never too old to stand up for what's right. That principle didn't need my name attached. It just needed to persist. 300 years after I died, Riverside Elementary still existed, transformed over centuries. Buildings rebuilt, technology advanced. But the Margaret Chen Health Center remained. Historic landmark, preserved legacy. My statue still stood. Weathered by 3 centuries but maintained. People walked past and wondered who Margaret Chen had been. Why a health center was named after her. Why a statue honored a school nurse. Tour guides told the story. Simplified over centuries, but the core remained. Margaret Chen was a school nurse who was fired to save money. Children were harmed. She organized parents and fought back. She changed laws across America. She proved that healthcare is essential and that ordinary people can defeat bad policies. Visitors took photos. Children asked why a nurse deserved a statue. Parents explained that heroes come in all forms, that you don't need fame or power to make a difference, that fighting for what's right is heroic. 500 years after I died, the details were mostly forgotten. The Margaret Chen Health Center had been demolished and rebuilt multiple times. The statue was in a museum. My story was historical curiosity. But the principle persisted, embedded so deeply in culture that people no longer questioned it. Of course, schools need nurses. Of course, children's health can't be sacrificed for budgets. Of course, healthcare professionals should speak up when policies harm patients. Of course, communities should organize when children are endangered. These ideas, fought for by a school nurse half a millennium ago, had become self-evident. And that was the ultimate victory. Not fame, not remembrance, but principles that outlasted any individual life. The work I'd done hadn't been about me. It had been about proving something that future generations would accept as obvious, that children deserve health care, that schools need nurses, that communities have power, that ordinary people can fight systems and win. Those principles, seeded by one fired school nurses fight, had grown into foundations of how society operated. Most people didn't know where the principles came from, didn't know my name, didn't remember the lawsuit or the organizing or the legislation, but they lived by the principles. And that was enough. That was everything. Back in the present, in the moment of my story, something important was happening. School nurses across America were being valued, not eliminated to save money, not replaced by inadequate contractors, but valued as essential professionals, trained in advocacy, empowered to speak up, supported by communities, protected by laws. These nurses, working in my philosophy, were serving millions of children, making sure Tommies got their inhalers, helping Sarahs manage their epilepsy, monitoring David's diabetes, protecting Maya's from allergens, proving every day that healthcare professionals are essential and cannot be replaced by cost-cutting measures. And they were teaching younger nurses, passing on not just medical skills but advocacy skills, documentation, organizing, fighting, ensuring the principles continued. Amanda Rodriguez, now 44, was training her 100th cohort of nurses through the Advocacy Institute. She'd spent 2 decades carrying forward what I'd started, teaching nurses that caring for patients includes fighting for systems that enable proper care. On the last day of training, she told them my story. One nurse fired for being too expensive. Children harmed because of that decision. Parents organized. Documentation gathered. Media engaged. Lawsuit filed. Victory won. Legislation passed. Movement created. Thousands protected. All because one person refused to stay silent. You have that same power. Amanda told the nurses. Document what you see. Organize your communities. Speak up when policies endanger patients. Fight. Because if we don't fight for them, who will? The nurses left inspired, armed with tools, ready to protect children, ready to fight when necessary. The legacy continued. Across America, in health centers and nurses' offices, school nurses were living my philosophy, caring for children, building relationships, monitoring health, and fighting when policies threatened safety. When districts proposed coverage cuts, when administrators suggested outsourcing, when budget pressures threatened children's health, nurses organized. They documented potential harms. They connected with parents. They presented evidence. They fought just as I'd shown them, just as I'd proven was possible. The work never ended, but it continued, carried forward by people who believed, as I had believed, that children's health is too important to sacrifice, that healthcare professionals have power, that communities can defeat bad policies, that documentation and organizing work. Somewhere, right now, a 61-year-old school nurse is being told her position is being eliminated, that she's too expensive, that a cheaper alternative exists, and somewhere, right now, that nurse is deciding whether to accept it or fight back. This story is for her, to show that fighting back is possible, that organizing works, that communities will support you, that documentation defeats claims that cuts are harmless, that one person can change laws, to show that you matter, that your experience is valuable, that your knowledge can't be replaced, that children need you. I was 61 when they fired me, told me I was too expensive after 33 years of service. I could have accepted it, could have walked away believing my experience didn't matter. Instead, I documented that children were being harmed. When organized 1,200 parents, I exposed administrators who'd chosen money over safety. I fought back, and I won. Not just for myself, for every child in every school, for every parent who depended on school nurses, for every healthcare professional who'd been told they were too expensive, for the principle that children's health matters more than cost savings. If I could do it, so can you. Your experience is valuable. Your knowledge is essential. Your advocacy is powerful. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. Remember, I was fired at 61. They told me a part-time contractor could replace my 33 years of knowledge. They calculated that lawsuits from harmed children would be cheaper than my salary. They endangered children to save money. But I fought back. I organized parents who became an army. I documented harm that became evidence. I exposed corruption that became headlines. I filed a lawsuit that became precedent. I changed state law that became national law. I proved that one school nurse matters. If I could do it, you can too. Your best work isn't behind you. It's in front of you, in the children you'll protect, in the policies you'll fight, in the communities you'll organize, in the lives you'll save by refusing to stay silent. Go save them. See you in the next story. Neither budget cuts, nor administrative pressure, nor being told you're too expensive can stop a healthcare professional who refuses to let children be harmed. My story didn't end with my death. It lived on in every nurse who organized, every parent who fought, every child who received care because someone refused to accept that healthcare was negotiable. Years after I died, researchers studied the long-term impact of school nurse advocacy. They found measurable results. Districts with strong school nursing had better attendance. Children with chronic conditions managed their health better. Emergency interventions decreased. Academic performance improved. Mental health outcomes were better. Because when children feel safe and cared for, they learn better. When they know someone is watching out for them, they thrive. When their health needs are met, they succeed. The research proved what I'd always known, that school nurses aren't just treating sick kids. We're creating environments where all children can thrive. We're the safety net that catches problems early, the trusted adult that children confide in, the healthcare professional who knows that education and health are inseparable. A study published 20 years after my death analyzed the economic impact of the Margaret Chen School Safety Act. It found that every dollar spent on school nursing saved $3 in emergency care, lost productivity from parents missing work, and long-term health costs from poorly managed chronic conditions. School nurses weren't an expense. They were an investment in children's health, in parents' ability to work, in communities' well-being. The study was titled The Margaret Chen Effect: How Investing in School Nursing Creates Economic and Social Returns. It became required reading in public health programs. Another study examined the ripple effects of my advocacy. It found that the organizing techniques I'd used, documentation, parent coalitions, media engagement, evidence-based advocacy, had been adopted by other healthcare professionals facing similar battles. Home health nurses fighting insurance denials, hospital nurses fighting unsafe staffing ratios, public health workers fighting budget cuts, all using the same playbook. Document the harm, organize the affected community. Present irrefutable evidence. engage media strategically, fight persistently, and win. The study concluded that my case had created a blueprint for healthcare advocacy that had protected millions of patients beyond just school children. My legacy wasn't just school nursing. It was healthcare advocacy broadly, proving that healthcare professionals could fight systems and win. 30 years after my death, a major nursing organization established the Margaret Chen Award for Healthcare Advocacy, given annually to nurses who documented system failures, organized communities, and changed policies to protect patients. The first recipient was a pediatric nurse who'd exposed hospital policies that endangered premature infants. She'd organized parents, filed complaints, won policy changes, just as I'd taught. The second recipient was a home health nurse who documented that insurance companies were denying necessary care to elderly patients. She'd organized families, engaged media, changed regulations, using my playbook. Year after year, nurses across specialties won the award, all of them fighting for their patients, all of them refusing to stay silent, all of them proving that healthcare advocacy works. 40 years after my death, a medical school added a required course called Healthcare Advocacy and System Change. It taught future doctors what I'd learned through experience, that being a good healthcare professional means more than treating individual patients. It means fighting for systems that enable proper treatment. The course used my case as a central example. It taught students to recognize when policies harm patients, to document systematically, to build coalitions with affected communities, to work with media effectively, to persist despite resistance. To fight. Graduates of that program went on to change policies in hospitals, insurance companies, public health departments, and government agencies. They fought for better staffing ratios. They challenged insurance denials. They advocated for underserved populations. They proved that my principles worked across healthcare. 50 years after my death, the healthcare landscape had changed dramatically. Technology had advanced, treatments had improved, systems had evolved. But the principle I'd fought for remained central, that healthcare is essential and cannot be sacrificed for cost savings, that healthcare professionals must advocate for their patients, that communities have power to change policies, that documentation and evidence defeat even powerful opposition. My story was taught in medical schools, nursing schools, public health programs, and healthcare administration courses. Not because I was special, but because I'd proven something important that needed to be passed on. 75 years after my death, they held a symposium at the renamed Margaret Chen University School of Nursing. Healthcare advocates from across the world attended. They discussed my legacy, my organizing techniques, my documentation methods, my coalition building strategies, my media engagement, my policy advocacy. And they discussed how to apply those techniques to current challenges: healthcare access, insurance coverage, pharmaceutical costs, mental health services, health equity. Every challenge in modern healthcare required the same tools I'd used: document harm, organize affected communities, present evidence, fight persistently, change policy. 100 years after my death, my principles were taught worldwide. Healthcare systems in dozens of countries had adopted policies ensuring that healthcare professionals could advocate for patients without retaliation, that communities could organize to challenge harmful policies, that evidence-based advocacy could defeat cost-cutting measures. The United Nations cited the Margaret Chen case in recommendations for healthcare system design. The World Health Organization included school nursing in essential health services, partly because of the evidence my case had provided. My fight had gone global. 150 years after my death, the question wasn't whether healthcare professionals should advocate. It was how to do so effectively. My case provided the template. The documentation methods I'd used were taught in every healthcare program. The organizing strategies were standard practice. The policy advocacy approaches were established. I'd created not just a movement, but a methodology. A proven approach to fighting for patients and winning. 200 years after my death, a historian wrote a comprehensive biography. Margaret Chen, the school nurse who changed healthcare advocacy. It detailed my 33 years of service. My firing, my discovery that children were being harmed, my decision to fight, the organizing of parents, the documentation of incidents, the lawsuit, the legislation, the movement. The book revealed aspects of my story that had been forgotten. The fear I'd felt challenging powerful institutions, the nights I'd stayed up documenting incidents, the times I doubted whether fighting was worth the risk, the personal cost time away from family, stress, financial uncertainty during the lawsuit, but also the moments of triumph, the first parent who joined the fight, the first media story that validated what we were saying, the jury verdict, the legislation passing, the children who were protected because we'd fought. The historian concluded that I'd been an ordinary person who'd done something extraordinary, not because I was special, but because I'd refused to accept that children being harmed was inevitable. That single refusal, that insistence that things could and should be different had changed laws, protected millions, and inspired generations. 300 years after my death, scholars debated my place in history. Some argued I'd been more symbol than substance, that the changes attributed to me would have happened anyway, that I'd been lucky to have strong evidence and organized parents. Others argued I'd been transformative, that without my fight, school nursing would have been eliminated, that I'd created a blueprint for healthcare advocacy that was still being used. The truth was complicated. I hadn't single-handedly changed healthcare, but I'd been a catalyst, a person who'd refused to stay silent at a crucial moment, who'd had the right combination of evidence, courage, and community support, and who'd proven that fighting was possible, that mattered, because change doesn't come from one person. It comes from movements, from communities organizing, from ordinary people refusing to accept injustice. I'd started something, but thousands of others had carried it forward, had won their own battles, had protected their own patients, had built on what I'd begun. The change belonged to all of them. 500 years after my death, my story was taught to children, not in medical school, in elementary school, as a lesson about civic engagement and standing up for what's right. Children learned that an ordinary school nurse had fought powerful institutions and won, that she documented problems, organized parents, and changed laws, that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences. They learned the principles, document what's wrong, organize people who are affected, present evidence, fight persistently, change systems. These principles, applicable far beyond healthcare, became part of how society taught civic responsibility. 1,000 years after my death, the details had faded entirely. Few people knew my name. The lawsuit was forgotten. The organizing strategies were taken for granted. But the principle endured, deeply embedded in culture across centuries, that professionals should fight for those they serve, that communities have power to change harmful policies, that documentation and evidence matter, that ordinary people can defeat powerful institutions. These ideas, seeds planted by one fired school nurse, had grown into civilizational foundations. Back in my present, in the years after my reinstatement, I received letters from nurses across the country. They told me stories of battles they were fighting, of hospitals reducing staffing, of insurance companies denying care, of policies that endangered patients. And they told me how my story had inspired them to fight. I answered every letter. I connected nurses with resources. I shared documentation templates and organizing strategies. I offered encouragement because I knew how hard fighting was, how exhausting, how scary, and I wanted them to know they weren't alone, that others had fought and won, that it was possible. One letter stood out. From a young nurse named Maria. She wrote, "Dear Margaret, I'm a 26-year-old pediatric nurse. My hospital is trying to reduce staffing ratios to save money. We're already stretched thin. If this policy passes, patients will be harmed. But I'm scared to fight. I'm early in my career. I don't have tenure or protection. I could lose my job. What if I speak up and nothing changes? What if I make things worse?" Then I read your story. You were 61. You'd worked 33 years, and you still risked everything to fight. If you could do it, maybe I can too. Can you help me? I called Maria that evening. We talked for 2 hours. I walked her through the process, document incidents, connect with other nurses, engage patient families, present evidence to administration. If they don't respond, go to media and regulators, fight over the next 6 months. I mentored Maria. She documented unsafe conditions. She organized 37 nurses who shared her concerns. She connected with families of affected patients. She presented their case to hospital administration. When administration dismissed them, Maria went to the media. The story aired. The hospital faced public pressure. The staffing reduction was canceled. Maria kept her job, and she learned that fighting works. Years later, Maria became a nurse manager, then a hospital administrator, then a healthcare policy advisor. And throughout her career, she fought for proper staffing, patient safety, and healthcare worker protection, all because one letter had given her courage. That was my real legacy. Not the lawsuit or the legislation or the awards, but the nurses like Maria, like Amanda, like Elena, who'd learned that fighting was possible, who'd won their own battles, who'd protected their own patients, who'd taught the next generation. The ripple effects were infinite. Every nurse I'd helped went on to help others. Every battle won inspired more battles. Every policy changed protected more patients. Every person who learned to fight taught others to fight. I was one person, but I'd started something that multiplied endlessly. At 78, as I lay dying, I thought about that multiplication. About Tommy and Sarah and David and Maya. About the 1,200 parents who'd organized. About the 43 schools whose nursing was restored. About the state and federal laws that protected millions. About the 8,000 nurses trained in advocacy. About the hundreds of districts where policy changes protected children. About the millions of children who were safer because someone had refused to stay silent. That was the mathematics of courage. One person refusing to accept injustice, multiplied by communities willing to fight, multiplied by evidence that couldn't be denied, multiplied by persistence that wouldn't surrender, equals change that protects millions. I closed my eyes for the last time knowing that the work continued, that nurses were fighting, that parents were organizing, that children were being protected, that the principles I'd proven persisted, and that somewhere, right now, a nurse facing a difficult choice was reading my story and deciding to fight. That was enough. That was everything. After my death, they found a journal I'd kept during the organizing and lawsuit. Private thoughts I'd never shared publicly. The journal revealed my doubts. The nights I'd wondered if fighting was worth the cost. The times I'd been scared I'd lose everything. The moments I'd wanted to quit. But it also revealed my determination. The anger I'd felt that children were being harmed. The love I'd had for every child in my care. The conviction that some things were too important to accept. One entry, written the night before the school board meeting, read, "I'm terrified. I'm risking everything, my reputation, my relationships, my peace. What if no one shows up? What if parents don't care? What if the school board ignores us? What if this destroys me and changes nothing? But then I think about Tommy, about Sarah, about David, about Maya, about 840 children who deserve to feel safe at school, who deserve to have someone watching out for them, who deserve health care. And I know I have to fight, not because I'm brave, but because they're worth it. Because if I don't fight for them, who will? That entry was reproduced in newspapers and textbooks. It showed that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's fighting despite fear. It's believing that what you're fighting for matters more than what you're risking. Generations of advocates read that entry and found strength. They learned that everyone who fights is scared, that doubt is normal, that courage means acting anyway. The journal became a historical document, preserved, studied, taught, because it showed the human side of advocacy, the private struggles behind public victories, the real person behind the legend. 25 years after my death, a playwright wrote a drama based on my story, The School Nurse. It was performed in theaters across the country. The play showed my 33 years of caring for children, the firing, the discovery that children were being harmed, the organizing of parents, the confrontation with administrators, the lawsuit, the victory. But it also showed my doubts, fears, and struggles, the human cost of fighting, the toll on relationships and health, the moments of despair. The play ended with me standing in front of the school board, speaking truth to power. The final lines were taken from my actual testimony. You calculated that harming children was cheaper than paying me, you were wrong. Not because the money matters, but because communities will fight for their children, because parents will organize, because 1,200 people will refuse to accept that their children's safety is negotiable. You can fire me, but you can't silence us. The audience gave standing ovations, many cried, because the story wasn't just about me. It was about every person who'd faced powerful institutions, every parent who'd fought for their child, every professional who'd spoken up despite risks, every community that had organized. 50 years after my death, a filmmaker made a documentary about the current state of school nursing. Margaret's Legacy, School Health in the 21st Century. The documentary visited schools across America. It showed nurses administering medications, treating injuries, monitoring chronic conditions, and providing mental health support. It interviewed children who depended on school nurses, parents who were able to work because their children's health needs were met at school, teachers who were grateful to have medical professionals supporting them, and nurses who'd been trained in advocacy, who organized when policies threatened children, who fought when necessary, who protected their patients. Every nurse interviewed mentioned my name, said they'd learned from my case, had been inspired by my courage, carried forward my principles. The documentary concluded with a statement from the American School Health Association. Margaret Chen proved that school nurses are essential, not luxuries that can be eliminated when budgets are tight, but fundamental to children's safety and well-being. Today, every state has laws protecting school nursing. Every district understands that healthcare is non-negotiable. Every school has nurses who know they can fight when necessary. That's Margaret's legacy. Not just one lawsuit or one law, but a fundamental shift in how America values school health. 75 years after my death, researchers conducted a comprehensive study. The long-term impact of the Margaret Chen case on healthcare advocacy. The study tracked every policy change, every lawsuit, every organizing campaign that could be traced back to my case. The numbers were staggering. Over 300 lawsuits had cited my case as precedent. Over 2,000 policy changes had been influenced by the organizing strategies I'd used. Over 50 pieces of legislation had been inspired by the laws passed after my victory. Over 100,000 healthcare professionals had been trained using my methods, and over 100 million patients had been protected by policies that traced back to what I'd started. The study concluded that I represented one of the most impactful healthcare advocates in American history, not because I was extraordinary, but because I'd proven that ordinary professionals could fight and win, and that proof had inspired countless others. 100 years after my death, medical ethicists studied my case as an example of professional responsibility. They argued that I'd established a new standard, that healthcare professionals have not just a right but an obligation to fight policies that harm patients, that silent acceptance of harmful policies is itself unethical, that advocacy is part of professional duty. The argument was controversial. Some said it placed unfair burdens on healthcare workers, that it wasn't reasonable to expect everyone to fight. Others said it was essential, that if healthcare professionals don't fight for their patients, who will? That expertise creates responsibility. The debate continued, but it centered on principles I'd established, that healthcare professionals can fight, that organizing works, that communities have power, that some things are too important to accept. Those principles, debated and refined over a century, shaped modern healthcare ethics. 150 years after my death, my story was ancient history, but the principles were contemporary. Students learned about me in the same way they learned about historical figures who changed society, not as a person to emulate exactly, but as an example of principles that transcended time. Document injustice, organize communities, present evidence, fight persistently, change systems. These principles, applicable to any era and any challenge, had become fundamental to how society thought about change. 200 years after my death, a virtual reality experience let people live through my story. They experienced being the school nurse who knew every child, the firing, the discovery that children were being harmed, the organizing of parents, the documentation of incidents, the confrontation with power, the lawsuit, the victory. Millions experienced the VR program. They felt the fear of challenging powerful institutions, the exhaustion of fighting while doubting, the joy of community support, the triumph of victory. And they learned viscerally what I'd proven, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things, that fighting is hard but possible, that courage means acting despite fear, that communities have power. The experience inspired a new generation of advocates, people fighting for climate justice, economic equity, civil rights, and countless other causes, all using the principles a school nurse had proven worked. 300 years after my death, sociologists studied why my story had endured. Why, among millions of people who'd fought for justice, my case remained remembered and taught. They concluded it was the combination of elements: an ordinary person doing extraordinary things, clear documentation and evidence, organized community support, a sympathetic cause children's health, a satisfying victory lawsuit won, laws passed, millions protected, a replicable strategy anyone could use my methods, a timeless principle that caring for vulnerable populations matters more than cost savings. My story had everything needed to inspire and teach, and so it persisted. 500 years after my death, my statue had been moved to a museum. The Margaret Chen Health Center had been rebuilt. Most details were forgotten, but the principle remained: that healthcare is essential, that professionals should fight for patients, that communities have power, that ordinary people can change systems. Somewhere in that museum, a child looked at my statue and asked, "Who was she?" And their parent answered, "She was a nurse who fought to keep children safe. She proved that one person standing up for what's right can change the world." That simple answer, given to countless children across centuries, was all I'd ever wanted. Not fame or glory or remembrance, but for the principle to survive, for the fight to continue, for children to learn that they have power, that they can stand up, that they can fight, that they can win. Back in my present, in the years between my reinstatement and retirement, I continued my work, caring for children, training nurses, organizing when needed, fighting when necessary. Every morning, I walked into the Margaret Chen Health Center and saw children who were safe because we'd fought. Every day, I administered medications knowing that other nurses across the country were doing the same. Every afternoon, I trained nurses in advocacy knowing that they'd protect their own patients. Every evening, I went home knowing the work continued. I was 61 when they fired me, told me I was too expensive after 33 years of caring for children. I could have accepted it, could have walked away believing my experience didn't matter. Instead, I documented that children were being harmed. One organized 1,200 parents. I exposed administrators who'd calculated that lawsuits were cheaper than proper care. I fought back in court, and I won $4.2 million. Not for myself, for children. For every parent who depended on school nurses. For every healthcare professional who'd been told they were too expensive. For the principle that children's health matters more than budget savings. Thank you for watching my story. If it resonated with you, if it inspired you, if it gave you hope that fighting back is possible, I need you to do something for me right now. First, smash that like button. It tells YouTube this story matters and helps it reach more people who need to hear it. People who've been told they're too expensive. People who think fighting is impossible. People who need to know that healthcare professionals have power. Second, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story of people who refuse to let vulnerable populations be harmed. People who documented injustice. People who organized communities. People who fought back and won. Third, share this video. Send it to someone who's facing a difficult decision about whether to fight. Post it on your social media. Help spread the message that healthcare is too important to sacrifice, that communities have power, that ordinary people can change systems. And finally, tell me your story in the comments below. Have you been told you're too expensive? Have you seen policies that harm people? Have you fought back? Have you organized? I want to hear from you. I want to know where you're watching from and what this story meant to you. Because every one of us has the power to fight. Every one of us can document harm. Every one of us can organize communities. Every single one of us matters, regardless of our age or what systems tell us. Your experience is valuable. Your knowledge is essential. Your advocacy is powerful. You matter. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. Remember, I was 61. They told me a part-time contractor could replace my 33 years of experience. They endangered children to save money. But I fought back. I organized 1,200 parents who became an army. I documented harm that became evidence. I exposed corruption that became headlines. I filed a lawsuit that became precedent. I changed state law that became federal law. I proved that one school nurse matters. If I could do it, you can too. Your best work isn't behind you. It's in front of you. In the patients you'll protect. In the policies you'll fight. In the communities you'll organize. In the lives you'll save by refusing to stay silent. Go save them. See you in the next story. Neither budget cuts, nor administrative pressure, nor being told you're too expensive can stop a healthcare professional who refuses to let patients be harmed. Your patients need you. Fight for them.